Heights is where I was born and raised. It's been a few decades since I've been in the hood.
So up here is Soto Street. Soto actually goes right through many East LA neighborhoods in Boyle Heights.
I like to say the neighborhood produced three predominant career paths: cops, preachers, and gang members. My name is Ramon Mendoza, also known as Mundo. I am a former Mexican Mafia member who once specialized in murder, and I am here to talk to you about my life.
Talk about nostalgia.
So this was your neighborhood where you did all your running the streets, right?
Yes, back in the day, running the streets, doing all the things that gang members do. Every barrio is divided into cliques. Every street gang has cliques that are put together by age groups. You have certain guys that are a certain age that hang around together, and those guys were, they had a certain name. Like we had the older guys were the cut downs and the sharks. Our clique was the Tinies. Tinies Wall was our hangout spot where we would drink, concoct plans to do robberies, etc. The local street gang was known as VNE, for Barrio Nuevo Estrada Courts. As I ascended the criminal corporate ladder, my aspiration and desire was to become a member of the gang of gangs, the Mexican Mafia. This dream would become a reality when I joined this exclusive fraternity in San Quentin. Also known as La M, it was formed in 1957 at DVI, a youth incarceration in Tracy, California. M is the Spanish phonetic pronunciation of the letter M. Not to be confused with Mexican cartels from south of the border, the Mexican Mafia was born in the USA. The original members were American citizens of Mexican descent. The M has evolved to where it has a consistent membership of approximately 200 active members at any given time. It is considered the most powerful prison-spawned gang in the nation.
Mundo, growing up, when was the first time you were actually introduced, or did you hear when you first heard the word Mexican Mafia?
First time I heard the term Mexican Mafia was in 1966 at the Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, which happens to be the birthplace of the Mexican Mafia. They had started about 9 years prior. But 1966, I was locked up in K-Wing, a lockup unit for assaulting somebody. And while I was in there, there was a couple of inmates there that I got to know that talked about the Mexican Mafia prison gang. And so that was my first introduction. I didn't know a lot of the details because it didn't affect me there at DVI at that time. And I didn't become familiar with it until 1970 at Soledad, when I was locked up getting ready to be transferred to San Quentin. And I was locked up in the adjustment center with Topo Peters, Bebito Alvarez, and Güero Psycho.
And you already knew at the time that they were MA?
Yes.
They were full-fledged members?
Yes.
Did you look up to these individuals? At that moment, did you have like a desire, I'm going to be one of them someday?
Of course, I did. And because who they represented, I did look up to them. I did have this aspiration of, that's the kind of guy. Bebito had just killed a black inmate, Dopey Dan, who was either a BGF member or associate of theirs.
Topo, Bebito, and Güero Psycho were not your run-of-the-mill mainline convicts. They were bona fide M, and my hope was to someday be one of them, a Mexican Mafia carnal, a member. I played a chess game against Topo, and you play from cell to cell, and you call out your moves by calling out the number on the square. I beat him in the chess game. He got angry. I could hear his chess pieces fly out of his cell. So he must have smacked his chessboard and knocked them all over the tier.
And I was quiet. I didn't want to rub it in or anything because I'm not a made member. And something as little as that could get me whacked. So the other Emmett guys started teasing him. Say, come on, man, what kind of sport are you? The guy beat you fair and square. So Topo didn't talk to me for a couple days because he was still sulking and he had his little tantrum. His way of apologizing to me was inviting me to play him another game. And I didn't let him beat me, I beat him again. And this time he didn't get mad. So that was my introduction to Topo Peters.
When doing time in prison, you learn how to deal with loneliness. Career criminals were no exception. I was the youngest inmate at San Quentin and felt inclined to prove myself by being violent. Gang members behind bars become proficient in performing violent deeds. My primary objective as a prison gang member was targeting rivals for assaults and executions. Becoming a made member is the equivalent of climbing the gang members' Mount Everest. One day, after an extensive background check, I was finally approached and sponsored. So, my new direction in life would take an irreversible turn inside a California state prison. Big Mike Mulhern from Primera Flats and Manuel the Mad Korean and Erva from San Diego Logan Heights were the two men who raised their hands to bring me in.
Becoming a Mexican Mafia member, I describe, is like a courtship. And so in prison, conducting deeds for the fellas while they examine your resume, everybody has a criminal resume. And people become familiar with other inmates, what they've done in the past. So I was a proven convicted murderer, been involved in a lot of violence while I was behind bars, showed my willingness to participate and support the Mexican Mafia. And so these were all things that they put together in making a determination as to whether I would be willing to kill for the Mexican Mafia. They're not looking for people who are just able to kill. Like I've said in the past, anybody can kill. My little sister can kill if she has to. But there's a lot of inmates that, yeah, they're all able to kill, but are you willing to kill at the drop of the hat? Are you willing to perform a suicide attack under the gun rail? Are you willing to go after your enemies even if you're outnumbered? So these are all traits that they sought out. And so this is what they saw in me. And so apparently they conducted their investigation as to my background. They circulated my name. What they did in those days is your name was sent to all the prisons, and the members had a way of they would vote either yes, no, or defer to the sponsor. A no vote automatically nullifies anybody's membership. Refer to the sponsor is if you're not familiar with the person that's being recruited. Defer to the sponsor was the equivalent of a yes vote. So all the votes that came back on for me were either defer to the sponsor or yes. And so I was recruited. There was no, like in the movies, there was no intermingling of blood or none of that. It was a simple hug. Big Mike hugged me. Manuel shook hands. But you don't make a production out of this. You don't have all the carnales come out, and because you have gang investigators on the gun rail and Sergeant Hankins on the ground floor, and they're always looking for body language to check things out. So if you got all these guys and they're all hugging you and shaking your hand, they pull out their little notepad and they go, "Oh, Mundo just got recruited," or whoever, right? Big Mike directed me to the gym. He says, "Rock on Lou is working in the gym. He already knows that you're made. And just go in there and introduce yourself." They're sending me to different parts of the prisons where other carnales are, other brothers, so they can congratulate me. So when I walked into the gym, Rock on Lou already had this big smile on his face because, we already knew each other and he already knew that I had been confirmed. He hugs me and welcome to the clica, this and that. And so this little ritual played out throughout the prison with the other brothers. So now my career began as a Mexican Mafia member.
Had you already put in work for the Mexican Mafia at that point?
No, No, had not.
So your
And
reputation had preceded you from the streets.
my reputation preceded me, and see, that's a misnomer. A lot of people think that to join a prison gang, any prison gang, that you have to kill to get in, and that's not so. Many of us had 187s or murders convictions from previous incidents, whether they be street gang or whatever. And once you get recruited, you are definitely going to have many opportunities to perform for the organization, and you better be ready to kill, because if you don't, and they conduct an internal assessment, then you could become a target. So, and this has happened to many people. So, by the time I paroled in 1975, I had personally killed 6 inmates, and I had been a participant as a co-conspirator in, I don't know, a dozen, 2 dozen. I can't think of the number. I'd have to sit down and think of all the ones where I voted or had some kind of help create a distraction or whatever. Because there is no statute of limitations on murder, I will not talk about any of those, although people in the gang underworld, eyewitnesses that saw what I did and where I did it, they can talk about it, and I know they've talked about it amongst each other, but those cases do not have statute of limitations.
Okay, so generally speaking, with those 6 homicides that you're mentioning, there was an occasion that you write in your book, I believe, that you actually had blood on your clothing and you were questioned by the gang investigators. Is that right?
There was an incident on Christmas Day in 1972 in Soledad Central, where 2 members of a rival prison gang of the Nuestra Familia were killed in 2 separate wings. I was in one of the wings where one of the victims was killed, and when I was arrested or taken into custody for being out of bounds in that wing, they found blood on the cuffs of my pants that allegedly matched the blood of the Nuestra Familia victim. But there was so much blood of his all over the floor in that wing that there were other inmates that also had blood. So I was picked up as a suspect. There were allegedly eyewitnesses that saw me and identified me as the assailant. I obviously told the investigators that I was not the assailant, and that I had no information to give them about who did that killing.
Every street and prison gang has its combative rivals, their mortal enemies. One of our adversaries was the Nuestra Familia prison gang. In the midst of what was a one-sided war, they successfully took out one of our own. The rules and magnitude of engagement would carry on for many decades.
Cheyenne Cadena was a highly placed member, first wave member of the Mexican Mafia prison gang, and he was killed in Palm Hall in December of 1972 by the rival Nuestra Familia prison gang. He was stabbed multiple times, thrown off the tier, and he was the only Mexican Mafia member to be killed by a rival prison gang. The homicides that were committed on Christmas Day at Soledad Prison was a Mexican Mafia retaliation for the murder of Cheyenne Cadena, and that was the last time that Mexican Mafia members and Nuestra Familia members were allowed to be housed together for decades. Because of that incident, they made the final decision to separate the 2 groups. I learned that a member of the Nuestra Familia by the name of Woodsy Reyes had been mouthing off from in a lockup unit and boasting about Cheyenne Cadena and how he died. He was saying things like that Cheyenne Cadena had been begging for his life or something like that. So basically he was rubbing it in. And so when the word got back to the fellas of course are wanting to retaliate further because again, Cheyenne was not only the only member to be killed by the NF, he was a highly placed member. So when I heard that Woodsy had made these statements, I vowed that upon my release, I would find him and kill him.
True to my word and resolve, 2 months after my release from state prison, I would track down and take out Daniel Woodsy Reyes and his brother. Although I was ultimately arrested, charged, and convicted for these homicides, I was never charged or prosecuted for the murders of those 6 inmates when I was paroled from San Quentin. Immediately upon my release, I would meet and hook up with a Mexican Mafia member by the name of Joe Morgan. I became Joe's right-hand man and partner in many crimes. We would be responsible for spreading the Eme gospel by establishing the Mexican Mafia Street Criminal Foundation on the streets of LA and beyond. Distributing drugs and committing multiple homicides were my constant companions in those days. You could say I was living in the fast lane on a runaway truck with no brakes.